Who are you?
My name is Sydney Bright.
Sydney, what do you do at Abundant Minds?
I work customer success.
Customer success, what does that mean?
Well, every client that walks through our door, as it were, they work with me. I help onboard them. I keep them updated on their status of their machines and if there's anything going on with them. But I also provide a kind of concierge educational service, anything that our clients need to know about Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be about mining, it could be anything related to Bitcoin, Bitcoin technology, Bitcoin education. I'm there to help them every step of the way. One of the first things a client of ours has to decide is what pool to use. So one of the first conversations I have is discussing with them what pools are, what the pool choices are available to them, how to think about the different pool choices. And then after that, what tends to follow is a conversation about wallets. Some clients come to us with a Bitcoin wallet already. Some clients don't know anything about what a Bitcoin wallet looks like or how to set one up. And so naturally, after I help them choose their pool account and we get their machine online, I also help them on their journey of taking self-custody over their own Bitcoin.
One of the comments that you'd made is that Bitcoin is the perfect private property.
Yeah.
Why do I want to do a mining pool? That sounds kind of socialist to me.
So I suppose it's good to step back and think about what pools are and why they're helpful. Imagine Bitcoin mining is a kind of lottery. Your machine is sitting there making trillions of guesses a second, just trying to guess the correct number. If it guesses the correct number, it gets to mine a block. And if you mine a block, you get 3.125 Bitcoin. But imagine a typical machine, it may not make that correct guess for 64 years. So it's very unlikely that if you buy a machine, it will ever make that correct guess. And this has been true, not necessarily 64 years, but this has been true for a very long time. As Bitcoin became more sophisticated and more competitive in the mining space, people got tired of spending so much electricity for their machines without getting compensated in the revenue. And how this was resolved very early on in the industry is, imagine many people pooled their machine together to have a kind of flattened out revenue stream. So imagine if anyone within the pool hits a block, they will share amongst the revenue amongst each other so that you can make, let's say, monthly earnings in Bitcoin without having to worry about your electricity fees, being 100% of what's happening rather than, not making Bitcoin. And so pools are really just a way of making revenue more consistent so that you can month to month pay your electricity bill and month to month earn Bitcoin without having to worry about winning that lottery.
Why is Bitcoin the perfect personal private property?
Well, I think the best way of answering that question is to first think about the human experience in general. So imagine most of the story of mankind is people using violence to take other people's stuff. And there's a term I really like called a allodial title. And an allodial title, it's a claim over property where there is no superior claimant. So for example, many people act as if when they own property in the United States free and clear, that it is their property. But within the Constitution, it actually states that the federal government has superior claim over that property. So imagine the federal government has a allodial title over all real estate, regardless of free to clear or not. And imagine if you take a step back, you realize that the term allodial title, as far as I understand, is first used with, the Pope of Europe and then the kings and queens of Europe, right? It's the people at the very top who have the most power, who can use their power to take ownership of all the property of their land. And imagine, I think it's humbling to consider how we still live in that kind of society today. You don't own the money in your bank account, if that's money at all. You don't own the stocks in your brokerage account because, the brokerage account doesn't even claim title over that security. There's actually a superior claimant. I forget the name of that institution in the United States that sort of owns all you can imagine the physical pieces of paper that are the actual securities of the stock. And so if you step back and you thought about your own life, and you thought about all of the financial assets you own that you actually have claim over and there's no superior claimant over it, you realize that it's basically zero unless you maybe had some gold coins you had in a safe somewhere that you could use, again, your own physical body and your own physical power to defend if need be. And I really do think that Bitcoin is the invention of what you could call, a allodial title provided to the masses. So it is a kind of property that anyone with a cell phone can physically own. I suppose if you want to physically own it, it's better to have your seed phrase on a piece of metal. But regardless, anyone that has Bitcoin has a kind of property where no one through physical force can take. And the reason why is because the physical force required to take Bitcoin is actually what Bitcoin mining is. So a Bitcoin miner is a kind of a physical defender of every single user's of Bitcoin's property rights, so that anyone with Bitcoin can have a kind of property right that is physically defended just as the property rights of all the, the kings and queens, the sovereigns of our past had their own allodial title. But again, it's democratized. It's for every single person. And so it really is the most advanced and sophisticated form of private property we've ever had, because it is the fusion of both, let's say, adhering to the laws of nature and humanity, where physical power is required to truly own something, but also being something that everyone can have, even if they don't want to use physical violence. And in that way, it's also if you'd allow me to be romantic for a second, I actually think it's kind of global peace machine, because it allows for the defense of private property to be something that isn't violent, right? So in all times in human history, if someone wanted to take something from someone or wanted to acquire property, not through trade, right, they would use physical violence to do so. And regardless of how distasteful every single human being finds that to be, there will always be people with a lot of power that try to do that. And the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that the only way to really participate in that is to mine Bitcoin, and doing so strengthens everyone's private property rights. In doing so, it's like the opposite of mutually assured destruction. It's mutually assured protection, that everyone is incentivized to use physical power to defend their property, and defending their own property defends the other person's property. And all of this sort of, you could think of it as cybernetic warfare, and property protection is done mutually beneficially without any need of physical violence.
What are your hobbies?
I like to snowboard. I don't mind just doing anything as simple as going out in the sun and reading a book, or I don't really have to be doing anything, I think it's good just to be present and experience life as it is.
When did you first get interested in Bitcoin?
I was in middle school when the 2008 financial crisis happened, and that sparked a curiosity in me wanting to study economics and politics. At the time, my dad noticed that I started to become interested in these topics. He took me to Washington, D.C., and he gave me sort of a crash course on the basics of economics, the basics of how our government worked, the 3 branches, all that kind of thing. By the time I'm in high school, I think it's about junior year in high school, I get exposed to Austrian economic literature, and I dive headfirst and I start reading all the books, the treatises of Mises and Rothbard. And around that time, while I'm engulfing myself in the study of Austrian economic literature and the study of the Federal Reserve and history of money, I become exposed to Bitcoin. But at the time, I knew that money had to be scarce, and I heard internet money, and I thought, well, that's really cool that some libertarian, software developer wants to fix this problem, but money has to be scarce, and things can't be scarce on the internet. Of course, if I looked it up for 5 seconds and realized it was the invention of scarcity on the internet, I would have been, a very different person, I suppose, at this point in time. But I fast forward to about 2017 or 18, I'm a senior in college. I revisit the subject. I learned that Bitcoin can be mined, and recently in life I had just built my own computer for playing video games, and so I buy a graphics card, I shove the graphics card into my computer, I learn more about how Bitcoin really works. At that time, it wasn't really economic to mine Bitcoin with a graphics card anymore. ASICs were just now coming out, and so, or at least that's what I remember saying. That's probably not 100% true. And I would mine Ethereum and then convert to Bitcoin, and that's when my understanding really begins. And then there's another several years of slow study until I do what I'm doing now.
Why should my parents buy Bitcoin or invest in a Bitcoin miner?
Well, while we're on the topic of my thoughts in high school, what greatly disturbed me back then was that I realized that you could really understand most of the problems of our modern world, especially as it relates to politics and economics, as a consequence of the fake money system we have today. So back then, imagine I was very into reggae music, and I used to grow dreads, and that sort of culture of being closer to nature, being maybe a little anti-consumeristic, anti-materialistic, I was really drawn to those ideas. And the basic premise of Keynesian economics was that if you print money and you make it so that every person's subsequent paycheck gets less valuable over time, they're incentivized to spend their money, and that stimulates the economy, because of course he's speaking at a time when they're trying to figure out how to deal with the depressions of that time. And so imagine in a world where fiat money is always being printed, it is constantly causing people to spend all the time as a matter of impulse. And obviously I think you could extrapolate the negative consequences way beyond that, but that really upset me when I was young, to think that all of these deeper cultural problems, maybe even spiritual problems, were caused by our structure and system of money. And so imagine what that also looks like from a consumer point of view, is that life always gets more expensive. When you increase the supply of money, your grocery store gets more expensive, your electric bill gets more expensive, the houses get more expensive, everything gets more expensive. And that just means that every single person, aside from the people at the very top who sort of get fed the dollar when it first gets produced gets poorer every day. And there's really no escaping that. And everyone should think about taking the lifeboat to that system, because that system is designed so that they are slaves to consumerism and a kind of population where the wealth is constantly being drained from their pockets. And so I think from a pure lifestyle point of view, everyone would benefit from not having their wealth get stolen by Federal Reserve paper money system. But I would even bring it back to something more, let's say, primitive. Imagine, I think there's great value and meaning in recognizing that what we do in our life is meant to be passed to our children and our children's children and our children's children's children. You know, I often think about when you go, especially to foreign countries, older places, and you see buildings that are just the most immaculately beautiful thing of all time. And you know that the person who designed that building did not even see the building when it was finished, right? So for what reason did that person put their blood, sweat, and tears into designing a building that they wouldn't even see? You know, why plant a tree if you won't see it when it's fully grown? And I think when it comes to property, those thoughts can manifest themselves. You know, a parent should think about accumulating property and power and wealth, all those being somewhat synonyms in a way, so that they can pass it on to their children. And so even if you're a parent or a grandparent and maybe you don't have enough time to see Bitcoin become a crazy big number, it's not really about you, it's about your family, and it's about the descendants who will benefit from that freedom.
In your own words, what's it like to work for Abundant?
There's a great sense of meaning and camaraderie in the team of Abundant Mind. And Bitcoin has a very interesting way of changing a group of people. There is something very meaningful about it. I find that every single person that really starts to touch this thing imbues a kind of hope and joy and optimism of the future and the present and everything like that. And when a group of people that are of pure intention of just wanting to help this thing grow and manifest into what we all think it will become, there's a kind of light that surrounds those people and surrounds a team of those people. And working with a bunch of people that have that just pure intention to make a helpful and high integrity, honest company is just an incredible joy.